I'm going to talk to you on burst mode. Very often on your phaco machines, the burst mode is there. Everybody looks at it and says, yeah, dangerous mal hai. Hardly anyone utilizes it. It's a brilliant part of a phaco machine, which is something you really should use. I'm going to talk to you a little on it. First, so we understand what we are talking about, I'm going to analyze what we call as burst mode. One is continuous phaco. We are not going to talk about that. In continuous phaco, what does it do? It's like an ordinary electric bulb as compared to a tube light. Tube light generates the same amount of light, but it doesn't generate heat, remains cool, consumes 75% less power. Same systems work when we use either a continuous, a pulse, or we use a burst mode. Burst mode doesn't mean that it just goes on bursting away. Burst mode indicates that as you raise your power on your foot, you can manage to get larger and larger segments of energy which can be released in at the same time. In a pulse mode, each shot of energy is called as a pulse. And a pulse is a constant. You can break a pulse down. The time between one pulse and the next pulse is what we call a cycle time or pulse interval. I won't go into that, but just to understand that the duty cycle is independent of the number of pulses per second. It is the range, the split which occurs between the two. Once you understand, then you understand what is burst mode. When set with a fixed power, a burst mode is called as a multiple burst mode. So if you set a burst mode running at say 60% power, you call it multiple burst mode. Now with multiple burst mode, you have the advantage that you can alter as your energy goes on, the power increases simultaneously. If you set it on multiple burst mode, the power remains constant, only the number of pulses per second increases. So multiple burst mode is what you should utilize if your machine has the availability of it. If you clarify it further, I won't go into the science of that part, but just to give you with this little diagram is essentially what you are looking at is if you use a continuous burst mode in the same amount of quantum, if you utilize with a 50% duty cycle, then the energy which you utilize becomes much less. To complicate matters further, you can also have what is known as a hyperburst cool mode, which allows you to have durations as less as 4. These we call as microbursts. And these microbursts reduce the total quantity of energy used. So some of the machines now have microburst capability. So put your machine onto multiple bursts, set it on microburst with a variable rise time, and that will give you the best quantum which you can utilize. Sounds Greek and Latin, but what we need is enough theory, as I said. Let us see it in action. First we see it in actual mode. Now you have to understand, a burst mode is like Dracula. Count Dracula was originally known as Vlad the Impaler because his pet way of killing people was to put them on stakes. Remembering that, I'm now going to show you a set of videos which shows how you impale with a burst mode. Now as you see, we have now rotated the nucleus around. The phaco, touch it to the phaco, it will impale, enabling you to do your splits on an instant basis. You will notice this is one of the ways the burst mode works in this form. You will notice when it enters the lens, there will be a little dhua as the energy is automatically liberated. We will see it in a sequence of cases of different types, different densities to show you that this particular technique and this particular part of the phaco machine available to you is something you can use on a regular basis. You no longer need to groove. This is a hard brown. Split it. It will just hold it. Touch it onto the lens. Gradually put your foot down. It sinks it. It just automatically will sink into place. Really nothing more needs to be done. So breaking lenses up into little bits becomes a joke. Irrespective of the density of the lens, if you do your settings, multiple bursts, set it with a graded. I have selected harder and harder cataracts running down the line. Put it, hold it, and impale it. Pull it down. you will immediately get a split. And the big advantage of these methods is essentially that you can therefore do your phaco in literally 3 minutes, 4 minutes, walk out. Once your lens is fragmented into little bits. And the other big advantage is, remember that a tip generates ultrasound energy. When it is exposed, you bury it inside, there is no ultrasound energy being generated, being spent outside or wasted outside. So these are all protected sources. So the cornea remains crystal clear the next day, which is really what you need to look into. So as you see in the sequence of these cases, just put your energy on and burst it. You only need to gently tap it down and it goes away. Once your pieces are broken up, then you change the mode and go on to the next mode. Another way of using burst mode is to core out the central part of the hard lens. It sounds esoteric, but with this particular burst mode system which you have, it is a method of handling what we literally say as rocks. No sound. Now in this particular technique, it's what we call as boring and decoring. We use the stroke moment of the phaco tip on a vertically supported nucleus to core out the nucleus center, converting it. You notice it in this little short animation which I have done, because this is a technique which you should be able to utilize it. Hydrodissect it off, and now what you are going to do is only make little openings or cores in the lens. Now each time you turn it around, you make a little hole. So you're literally coring out 4 cores and 5 cores. You're doing nothing, you're not breaking, you're not doing anything. Finally, when you make your cores, you make one in the middle, depend on the density of the cataract. If it is very hard, you do 4 or 6 cores. If your density is less, you can manage with 3 cores. What the coring does is it removes out the hard central part of the lens. When you break it down, then what you are essentially left with is a donut. And a donut has no central part. Let me demonstrate to you on an actual case. You make the lens stand vertically, then you support it at the side and use your burst mode, which is a system I've showed you about. Burst multiple mode. Expose the phaco tip a little more than what you have normally would do and simply embedded it into the surface. Cut your suction down radically. It is set to only 80 suction. 80 suction is just enough to keep your bore clean. Let it embed, drain it out again, turn your lens around and embed it again. You are only going to core each one individually, running all the way down. So you are only going to core each time. And each time you get a core, you get a small little opening in the middle. Advantage is every time you turn your lens around and you simply core it. Then you finally reach your final point and then you simply split your lens into 2. When you open the lens up, it is like the center of the lens is now gone. It's got an empty area in the middle, and that is the hardest part of the lens. So if you can remove the hardest part of the lens by coring it out, half your problems are gone. Then you change your parameters on, raise your vacuum, raise your suction limits, and raise your ultrasound and put it onto pulse mode, and then the final fragments can be easily removed without any difficulty or anything. So this is a method which you can utilize in case you have a really rock hard cataract. Use the burst mode as a corer and get rid of what you want to do. Thank you very much.